Hello and welcome. My name's Meredith McCarthy. I'm a clinical hypnotherapist based in Wellington, New Zealand. I hope everyone is having a great time out there. And this is a channel that I created originally to talk about my passion as a hypnotherapist and how I work with people. Now, I do have lots of other topics that I have already talked about. So if anyone is interested in specific topics, let me know and I'd love to talk about that. Anyway, in today's talk time, I thought we would sort of move through some ideas that maybe I've talked about before, but maybe in a slightly different way. And that is the art of suggestion. Okay. When we're using a number of techniques that help land a good suggestion. So I hope you enjoy today's talk time. Buckle up. Here we go. Now, when we're looking at the art of suggestion, a lot of people, they might have had their first experience around hypnosis and suggestion with stage hypnosis. However, when we're using it therapeutically, we don't always use that authoritarian styled hypnosis that you might see in stage hypnosis. However, some people do a bit of a combination of authoritarian styled hypnosis and more passive styled. Now, let's talk about the art of suggestion. Everyone has a story, and the story often needs to be interrupted so they can begin to think about the new story that they want winning. So the old story of belief might need to change, okay? So especially if they're not being helped by it. So it might be an addiction story. It could be one of motivation. So they're not feeling that they can motivate themselves enough in key areas of their life to be able to achieve goals and so on. So when a person comes in to see a hypnotherapist, okay, so someone who does therapy using hypnosis, the art of suggestion is something that we're trained in. Storytelling, metaphor, is a big part of the journey that people learn when they become a hypnotherapist, okay? So the art of storytelling is placing maybe an idea in someone's mind based upon sharing an experience that helps a person join the dots, let's say, work it out on a level. It's not saying you must do it like this, but you might share a story that is paralleling someone else's experience of success and allow that client to be able to listen to that story and take on board what makes sense to them, okay? So it could be the story of, there was once a client who came and they were smoking 40 cigarettes a day. And they finally had this epiphany that they deserved better than that. That you know, in life, they deserved more than just being hooked into this habitual behavior cycle. And they were noticing their health declining. But in their mind, they were not sure about how to quit. Now, their quit date was set, and they decided to do something very ritualistic. So every time they'd normally have had that cigarette, they decided to take a deep breath and say to themselves, I'm free. I can do this. This is easy. So instead of picking up that cigarette, they would take that deep breath and they would just say those words. And those words would be very confirming, very positive, and very uplifting. So they were building their belief in themselves. They had to, though, get to a point where they made peace with the decision of never having another cigarette, not even a puff, from then on. Now, when I share a story like that, it's called a surface structure metaphor. And what happens with a client is they start to take on board ideas that they could make their own. This is really essential because if you tell a client, Look, what you need to do is every time you'd normally have a cigarette is take a deep breath in and say these words, I'm free, I can do this, this is easy. Well, they may not be as responsive, okay? Because what you're doing is you're forcing an idea. The idea, it might be the best idea for them, but they didn't come up with it, they didn't buy in, and it may cause resistance. So often, authoritarian styled hypnosis doesn't always land as well as you might think. Now, if a client has already confirmed to you their plan, every time I'd normally have had that cigarette, I'm going to do this, this, and this. Then, as the authoritarian style comes in, you can say, just as you planned, every time you would normally have had that cigarette, you now do this, this, and this. So this is really direct. It's embedded in a way that is agreed by the client, because the client has the answers. And if we're trying to push our answers upon the client, it doesn't always land as well as we might hope. The other one is pacing with the client. If the client isn't ready yet, then the art of suggestion might be planting an idea that in a very short period of time, things start to feel like it's time to change. And they'll know when that happens, and it may even happen quicker than you think. So this is where the art of planting an idea that can be acted upon later, that can be very important. It's like a post-hypnotic suggestion. So when the time is right, things click into together easily. Now, it's very generic, that statement, but it's very positive, and it helps the client to imagine something changing. So you don't have to be specific about what it is that's changing, but you want to implant the road towards change. You want to get the client to imagine that change is possible, because a lot of times when people are embedded in an old way of thinking, they don't always believe that change can happen. Even though they come to you as a hypnotherapist and they're wanting change, it doesn't necessarily mean they fully believe it's going to happen. So there's a bit of a journey there within that client session. Embedded suggestions, surface structure suggestions are in the toolkit of a good hypnotherapist. A deep embedded suggestion might be a metaphor that's very universal, but the client isn't being explained how it relates directly, bit by bit. They get to go away and make it make sense. So it's amazing how often we think we're going down one path, and then we realize that there was another path available all the time. All we needed to do was pivot and begin that new path. And the old one fades away quickly. Now, these are ideas that then the client is using the analogy of a path. That path might represent many things to them, but you're not specifically saying what it represents. So this is more deep structure metaphor, where we're being artfully vague to a degree, but we're helping that client move towards choice, move towards empowerment. Many times, stories that children have heard have inspired them to become better people growing up. There are many childhood stories that you may have heard yourself that has helped you gain perspective and understanding and allowed you to make different decisions that if you hadn't have heard about that story, you may not have developed that perspective and may have made a different choice. So often stories as we're growing up, stories that we hear our parents sharing with us, not just stories that are written in a storybook. They're personal stories of adventure or experience or learning. We take on board those stories too. Now, sometimes, though, those stories are not always positive stories. They might be stories of stuckness or hardship. And this is where a client might be presenting with a lack of self-esteem or belief, and their parents may not have modeled self-esteem or belief. So they haven't really learned how to build that themselves. They've just seen repetitive cycles that are maybe a little dysfunctional, that they want to break away from. They don't want to be like their parents. They want to upgrade from that space. So when we're looking at that idea of suggestion and sculpting it around the client, it is really important that a person listens to the client's needs. Where are they at the moment? What is getting in the way? To not assume where they're at or what's getting in the way just because of your own personal experience about something that might be similar. The client has their own unique experience of that moment in their life. So when we're working, it's really important to help that client unpack a little bit by asking fantastic questions. And those great questions, when, why, who, what, how, right? They open up your idea or understanding of where the client is currently sitting. It is important that we are aware that our own body, mind has had experiences, and it can create unconscious bias. So it means that we're looking through a lens that is filtered with our perspective. So in a therapy space, we need to do our best to take off our own emotional filter and get curious. So when we get curious, we're dealing then with facts that are being presented from the client to us about what it is that's really going on for them. That gives you a chance as a therapist to sculpt something that is artfully meaningful for that client, using their words often, repeating those words in a positive and useful way is part of the art of suggestion. If someone says, I don't want to be angry anymore, you might ask a question. So how do you want life to feel? Well, I guess I want to feel more solid and being able to believe that I can turn up in a calmer way. Great. So at that point, you're going, okay, and every day you begin to feel more solid as you turn up and deal with things in a new way. You are repeating often the core intention of what that client wishes to experience. So as a good therapist, I do believe that listening is a core skill. Listening to understand deeper, better what's going on with that client so you can find the most empowering suggestions to feed back into that client's world. When a client hears the mirrored back, it's very, very powerful and magical to the brain. It helps to solidify intention, and strong emotion and strong intention are a key foundation for positive change. I hope you have enjoyed today's talk time. I'm going to be back another week, and in the meantime, if you're interested in finding out more about training to become a clinical hypnotherapist, if that interests you in some way, check out the website nzach.ac.nz. There's a diploma course. I will love to be your guide if that's your thing. Now, if you've got any questions, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. If you've liked the style of information and you want to know more about it, please remember to subscribe and like this video. It helps to me grow my channel, get it out there to more and more people. I love to share what I've learned over the 30 odd years that I've been in practice as a clinical hypnotherapist here in little old New Zealand. So I hope you've enjoyed today's talk time. See you again in another week. Bye for now.